Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. This webinar is being recorded. My name is Patrick Hewitt. I am the Vice President of Professional Development for the APA Ohio Cleveland section. And we're very excited for our second of our webinar series for 2024, Funding Infusion, Brownfields Revitalization with Federal Support, Technical Know-how, and Dynamic Partnership. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be reserving time at the end to answer Q&A questions. You can click Q&A, write your question in the chat box, and we will read those at the end. This webinar is being presented by APA Ohio's Cleveland section. We have on the leadership team, Amy Snell-Yost, myself, Schnur Kushner, Krista Piserchik, Arthur Schmidt, Kimberly Lieber, Laura Mendez-Ortiz, Nick Miller, and Cameron Roberts. If you have not been involved in all of our previous events, we encourage you to get involved. You can join our Cleveland section. We do have a new email address, which is apaclevelandoh@gmail.com. Please make sure that that's in your safe senders list. We do have a number of additional upcoming events in the month of November. On November 7th, we are being joined by folks from the City of Cleveland Planning Commission for a presentation on the Cleveland Form-Based Code that is being held at Cleveland State University, and we do ask that people register for that event if you can. There will be a happy hour afterward at Parnell's. On November 14th, we are teaming up with a number of organizations, including ULI and AIA, for From Cleveland to Coastland, talking about the efforts to build upon the two waterfronts in the city of Cleveland. That event will be held at Cleveland Foundation headquarters. And on November 20th is the OKI Regional Planning Conference in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We encourage folks to register and attend that as well. This webinar is available for CM credits. That credit number is shown there. We also want to thank the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission for co-hosting this webinar. And without further ado, we'll be getting into the webinar. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, Roxanne Anderson from KSU TAB, the Regional Director for EPA Region 5. Roxanne serves as the TAB Regional Director for KSU TAB's program, overseeing operations across 6 states within EPA's Region 5. Those include Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. In her role, Roxanne collaborates closely with communities and tribes, providing expert guidance throughout the intricate process of brownfields redevelopment. She adeptly identifies and addresses the unique needs of each site by assembling tailored teams of specialists. Roxanne maximizes available incentives and funding opportunities by fostering strategic partnerships with state and federal agencies, stakeholder organizations, and local governments. Before assuming her current position at KSU TAB, Roxanne played a vital role in supporting communities through the Ohio Brownfield Program at Ohio EPA. Her extensive professional background also encompasses ecological research with the USDA, as well as serving as a watershed coordinator. So we're very excited to have Roxanne. Roxanne, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Those bios always make me sound so much better than I think I do. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, are we good?
I am not seeing it yet.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. So as Patrick mentioned, I am the regional director for KSU TAB. I am new with KSU TAB. However, I'm not new to the world of brownfields and redevelopment. And since I'm from Ohio, I'm the most familiar with Ohio resources. I'm now just learning 5 other state resources, which is a little tricky. So to kind of get an understanding of where all of you are at, before I kind of dive into this, I wanted to start off with a little poll. I think Patrick is able to pull that up for you guys. All right, so what are some examples of potential brownfields in your community? This is really to get an idea of what kind of communities you guys are in and your understanding of what a brownfield is. Do you know what a brownfield is? Do you know what that looks like? These don't have to be in your community per se, but it's just to kind of gauge your understanding. All right, looks like almost everybody has responded. I'm seeing that about 90% of you chose abandoned gas station, which means that you're very familiar with that aspect. I had one person who's not familiar with brownfields and a few that chose single family homes. Those are single family homes are really the only thing that doesn't apply as far as a brownfield. Everything else on here is very much a brownfield. Let me hop out of here. So, what is a brownfield? A brownfield is a vacant or underutilized property that is difficult to develop because it's contaminated or it's believed to be contaminated, and that's very important. Both state and federal legal definitions presented on the screen, and you can kind of see that the word potential is used in both of those paragraphs. This allows some flexibility in how we designate them. It also helps you to start thinking to yourselves of some of the possible sites in your communities, as so many of them can fall under this definition. Here's a few examples. If you're drawing a blank on how to identify brownfields within your community, these are a lot of opportunities. This is by no means comprehensive. You obviously have gas stations on here, as well as churches and schools. And as you continue down the list, you may see some new sites that you might not have considered before today, such as maybe shooting ranges or lumber yards. And all of these really apply to a brownfield, as they can have some form of contamination that prevents them from being redeveloped. So typical brownfield tasks when you're going into the process of redeveloping a brownfield, there's typically 4 steps, and these are very big steps, and there's a lot of things in between them. But generally speaking, you have the planning aspect, which is the most important and can start long before you even identify your brownfields. You need to get them assessed, then you clean them up, and then you get them ready for reuse. And so we're going to kind of talk a lot about those 4 steps throughout this process. We're also going to talk a little bit about funding types. We have free services, which is always everyone's favorite. We have grants, which is also free, but there's usually a little bit of extra capacity needed to handle those. And then we have loans. And so with that, I wanted to do one more poll to kind of get an understanding of your experience with brownfield grants, whether that be federal, state, local. So how familiar are you with grant funding options for brownfield redevelopment? Awesome. So we have a pretty wide range, but most of you are somewhat familiar, which is going to help with your understanding in a lot of this. But then we also have a few that aren't really familiar at all. So I am going to be going into a lot of detail and covering a lot of sources. So Patrick has let me know that this will be recorded, so you can come back and revisit this if you have any questions, or you can just contact me. So don't feel overwhelmed if it's a little too much information. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about is how successful brownfield redevelopment happens when we recognize that the economy, the environment, and social elements are pivotal in the process. And rather than being discrete and separate entities, they're very interconnected in fundamental and critical ways when attacking a brownfield redevelopment project. The incorporation of a holistic approach in the redevelopment process is an important mechanism for ensuring not only the restoration and reuse of existing brownfield properties, but also that previous cycles of decay and abandonment are not repeated. The visual summary before you are the elements that should be incorporated into a community's brownfield project when addressing them. Economic, environmental, and social, and obviously planning. Please take note that the planning is separated from the other three elements to showcase that planning really is the foundation for implementing all of your reuse goals for any brownfield project in general. Successful, equitable brownfield redevelopment must be planned. It does not happen by accident or without a specific direction from the planning process. It's essential for all projects, as you know, not just brownfields. So you can apply these tips to other community projects if you want, as I go through here. But you'll want to start as soon as possible. Projects like this, especially with brownfields, can span from a few months to most likely a few years. So it's definitely important to have a tangible plan to kind of refer back to. Some of the most important aspects of implementing a successful plan is to have a champion, a visionary, which is usually the actual planner, and comes from community engagement. And your champion is the person who wants to rally the community and to begin the process of redevelopment for a brownfield and initiate change. Now, sometimes that community champion can be just a local, or they can be one of the other officials. They cannot even be living in the community, but around the community or impacting the community. But overall, persistence is definitely how these jobs and these projects get done. So you need to have that person. A planner might seem obvious to have as part of these projects, but they can assist with the understanding and bridge the gap between how the community's site reuse goals align with your local economic, social, and environmental conditions. So if the planning element is the foundation of brownfield redevelopment, then community engagement is the adhesive that holds it all together. If you are that champion for your community, early steps of this period can begin very early and can be very daunting, especially bringing the community together to raise awareness and establish a clear plan. You'll need to identify effective lines of communication. Each community is unique, but a good place to start is either social media or town hall meetings. During these outreaches via social media or town halls, you can gain a better understanding of what your community vision is, which you can implement into a reuse element for your brownfield project. And it can be difficult to establish a unified vision, but getting everyone on board is essential for a successful project. Another thing to keep in mind is to have a productive and collaborative atmosphere, no matter which path to use in your outreach, ensuring everyone has a voice, establishing clear expectations, and always putting your community vision first. An excellent example of this is a project we recently worked on in the village of Bel Air. The Bel Air project heavily relies on planning and community engagement aspects, but it also very much touches on the other elements of brownfield redevelopment. The village of Bel Air is located in Belmont County along the Ohio River and the West Virginia border. The community, like many in Appalachia, started losing its population after hitting its peak in the 1920s, and the main street of the village further declined after State Route 7 was built, running north to south along the border and funneling travelers away from the downtown area. The Ohio Brownfields program with the Ohio EPA applied for and received a technical assistance grant on behalf of the village of Bel Air. And after reaching out to the mayor and attending the village council meeting, it seemed a vision plan would be the best use of the funds for the community. This image here is a depiction of 3 brownfield target areas that were focused on, and how the corridor through the village center kind of tied them all together. One of the most interesting and unique things about Bel Air is the Great Stone Viaduct. The historic stone bridge opened in 1871 and was the main facilitator of growth in that area, creating connectivity to commerce across multiple states. This bridge is well known and has been featured in films such as Silence of the Lambs and Unstoppable with Denzel Washington, which is a favorite of mine. The Ohio Brownfields program has previously provided grant funding for assessment on the viaduct area, as well as a few other properties within the community. And it seemed that a vision plan would give the village tangible resources to move forward with for their projects and set them up for success when applying for future funding. They don't really currently have any other type of plan within their community. They're a very small village. And so a strategic plan or implementation plan or comp plan was really not an option for them. Their mayor's part-time. And so when we decided to implement this for them, it all kind of happened in 2020, and everyone knows what else happened in 2020. So COVID put a little bit of a damper on the community outreach events that we had planned to kick off the first step of the planning process. So we decided to think a little outside of the box, and we put together a survey. And for a small community, that can be a little scary. But the business owners in the area were very excited about making something happen in that community. So they put up flyers in their shops and table tents. And the Ohio EPA and KSU TAB, who I'm with, were also able to promote the survey via social media and through the Belmont County Community Improvement Corporation. And then there was an amazing and unexpected turnout for the survey. They got over 400 in a community of a little under 4,000. And they were able to get feedback for a much more diverse group of community members than you would probably get inside a single meeting. The feedback was digested, and after combining the information with a market study provided by KSU TAB and the brownfield inventory provided by the Ohio EPA, we targeted potential reuse plans for 3 brownfield sites within the community, one of which was the green space, properly nestled between the Great Stone Viaduct and the currently active railway bridge. This space was previously used by the railway and was significantly contaminated. It was clear that the safe outdoor public spaces were a priority to the community. So this particular rendering includes a playground, a community center, and some mini pitches that can double as pickleball courts. This type of vision plan and these type of renderings are things that are free with technical assistance from KSU TAB, and you can potentially also get them through the Ohio EPA. The Great Stone Viaduct Historical Education Society featured here. Oh, they don't have the sign, sorry. They secured funding from ODOT and multiple other resources. And in conjunction with the vision plan, they recently completed an accessible walkway on top of the viaduct that connects to a trailhead with parking. And they were also able to pave the area under the viaduct and provide educational signage, which also talks about a little bit of theatrical history. The society was also part of the vision planning process and is taking the community survey results into account as they move forward with developing the space between the bridges. The property will likely be getting over $500,000 in leveraged funds this year to complete the environmental cleanup. And the village is excited to see some of their plan finally coming to fruition. The image on the left here is the area under the viaduct from the viewpoint standing on Main Street, looking towards the green space in the previously depicted renderings. This plan proposed making the area a pedestrian walkway, which is currently a roadway for cars to drive under. And it would connect to their downtown public space, but it's currently pretty dark and highly underutilized. The vision plan and funding that Bel Air has received has created significant momentum, and the business leaders and community members are more engaged than they have been in years. And this plan has made it possible to apply for additional grants and has recently drawn interest from local developers. The planning and community engagement for this project is helping to make the outcome very sustainable. And the redeveloped brownfields that are currently underway are a result directly from this plan and will create housing, jobs, and green space while preserving the historical character and identity of this community. So what funding helped make this possible? One of the programs that was pivotal in the Village of Bel Air project was the Ohio EPA Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, commonly referred to as TBA program. This program aims to promote the redevelopment of brownfield sites by providing free environmental assessment services to your community. The services offered through the TBA program are available to assist you in transforming the brownfield properties in your area into economic and community assets. These services are at no cost for eligible properties. You can apply for TBA funding throughout the year because it's on a rolling basis. And the program offers phase 1 and phase 2 site assessments, geophysical surveys, asbestos and lead surveys, and a large array of planning activities. An eligible applicant for the TVA program must be a government or nonprofit entity, and the property is not eligible if it is subject to CERCLA or the National Priorities List. And while the applicant must be a government or nonprofit entity, a lot of times the community will apply on behalf of a private owner for the property. The government does not need to own the property for this. An eligible applicant for the TVA program must also, the property must also be commercial and industrial properties. They can be residential, but they have to have 4 units or more in size. So, you know, a large apartment building or something like that does count as a brownfield and is often assessed for asbestos and lead-based paint. If you have a property that you're unsure of or a project that you're unsure of, you can always reach out to the Ohio Brownfields program at any time, and I put the link here on the slide for you. As an applicant, you do not need to own the property, as I mentioned. All you need is a signed access agreement from the property owner, which is included in the online application at ohioepa.com or .gov, sorry. This grants legal access to the applicant, the Ohio EPA, and contracted consultants. So this is the one requirement that you have to have in order to be able to do these types of assessments. Foreclosed and forfeited properties are also eligible. The county auditor can act as an agent of the state, which basically means that they can act on behalf of the property owner to provide access in a lot of circumstances. So these projects can start to get underway before the property is transferred over. So just a brief understanding of what happens with a phase 1 and phase 2 assessment. Once the project is eligible, a phase 1 is usually done not only for liability protection before purchasing a property, it's also a prerequisite for that voluntary action program with the Ohio EPA if you're wanting to get the property cleaned. A phase 1 examines the historical use of a property to highlight any areas of potential contamination that may need to be further investigated, and they do interviews, they look at Sanborn maps over the last 100 years, and they look for recognized environmental conditions, also referred to as RECs. The Ohio EPA has contractors on hand that they oversee to complete the work for you for free, so you do not need to be able to handle a contractor or procure one. So once your RECs are identified, a phase 2 is completed. This is a sampling plan where they actually are on your property and sampling your actual media. This includes the collection of soil, groundwater, sediment, soil gas, and indoor air samples. The scope of a phase 2 is always tailored to the specific needs of the property owner so that they can leverage other potential funding and know exactly what they're dealing with. The TVA program, also does asbestos surveys, even if that's the only thing that the property needs. Keep in mind, if a building is to be demolished on a property, the asbestos survey is also a pre-demolition requirement for commercial buildings. So a lot of times this is helpful in helping move property redevelopment forward for the city. Timelines vary with the Ohio EPA. These are some general timelines, really depending on the time of year and how many projects they currently are moving. You can always reach out to them with any questions about timelines that you're concerned about and how fast you need to move a project along. So the Ohio EPA also offers free technical assistance to help navigate brownfield process. They facilitate collaboration meetings to discuss project details and help sort out funding options. Additionally, they offer workshops and trainings, just like KSU TAB, to provide education on the brownfield process and funding. And if you plan to take a property through the voluntary action program, they can provide free technical review of documents and help navigate rules on complex projects and ensure cleanups are protective of human health and the environment. So it's very helpful when you're not familiar with that language. In the spirit of collaboration, they can also leverage their program to partner with other agencies like the Department of Development, the Department of Transportation, the US EPA, and they share costs for larger projects or provide matches for other grant projects. So one of the entities that partner with Ohio EPA is KSU TAB, and we are a national technical assistance program, but we're also regional. So the US EPA has created a technical assistance grant that they give out every 5 years, and different entities apply for that. KSU TAB has 4 regions, US EPA Region 5, 6, 7, and 8, encompassing 21 states. And then we also hold the national tab, so we essentially aid all of the other technical assistance programs throughout the country, and then we will do national programs such as the National Brownfield Conference. So what are our services? It's a very difficult conversation to have because our services are broad and cover almost any aspect of brownfield redevelopment, with the exception of the actual assessments. We tailor every single piece of our technical assistance to the specific project at hand. So we are constantly doing things we haven't done before, and doing new things. And I'll kind of bring up some things that we have done and things that can be helpful throughout some of the case studies that I'm going to go through. But a lot of times things that can be helpful for community and moving forward with a brownfield project that they wouldn't think of would be simple things such as just helping them identify funding sources, or building community resiliency towards a potential redevelopment process, or do some economic feasibility or highest and best use market analysis to see what even works for this property. We do a lot with incorporating clean energy into redevelopment. We can do lots of strategic planning and redevelopment visioning. We can review any technical plans that you, or phase 1, phase 2s, anything you need help identifying. We can help in the process of a grant, whether that's, putting out an RFP or doing procurement or creating a work plan. It's a very broad reach. Here's another few things. We can provide fact sheets and information for a specific project. We help identify collaborations and partners for you if you need something like that. And then we can also help you find an environmental consultant if you have a very specific project that you're working on or have a grant that you're working towards. One of the things that we've been working heavily towards is helping communities create their own brownfield inventories. We think it's very valuable to have an idea of what properties within your community are potentials for redevelopment that can be reused other than greenfields. So we have a tool called the BIT tool. It is private for whoever owns that BIT tool. So if the city has the BIT tool, they can input information about brownfields. They can allow other users to input information about brownfields into that. And then it's usable for them and manipulated by them so that they can, adjust those properties as they become reused or whatnot. And it's very similar to a GIS platform. And I know they are in the process of trying to create a layer to be able to use with GIS, but it is currently separate. But it does have a lot of information that you can put in there so that you have an idea of what's currently in your community. So if you have a developer come to you or there's grant funds that are available, what's already there. Another really great tool that KSU TAB has is called Tab EZ. This is a grant writing tool. It's specifically geared more towards the US EPA grants, which I will go into. But it essentially breaks down every single section of those grants because they're highly competitive. It helps you so you don't miss any of those aspects. It helps determine whether or not you have the capacity to kind of apply for those types of grants and how much funding you can get. These are some other aspects that we can help with, especially related to grants. We do funding analysis and management to help determine, again, if you have the capacity to handle them. We can also help with reviewing your grant applications before you turn it in and giving you feedback on that. And then we also do community engagement. So I'm going to go into a few other state programs, just so you're familiar. These are, some are geared directly towards brownfields and some are very much applicable to leverage with brownfield projects. As you know, capital stacking is really important and is really what helps a project move forward. It's never usually one source. One of these programs is the Ohio Brownfield Loan Program. It's run through the Ohio Water Development Authority. And if a private entity can manage these funds, they can get a $500,000 loan for assessments and up to $5 million for cleanup, which is a lot in the cleanup world. There are many redevelopers and local governments out there that are taking advantage of this program, as the loan terms are very reasonable and very low interest, and sometimes forgivable. OWDA has also earmarked loan money for on-site stormwater projects. Reduction of stormwater discharges and its proper management are ongoing concerns for communities and businesses. Many communities are considering brownfield properties in their stormwater management planning, which is really essential. And obviously, with planning being so important, the stormwater loan is a low interest loan with funding up to $5 million, so it can help in that process even before you're working on that specific brownfield. The Jobs Ohio actually has quite a few programs, but I'm going to focus on Jobs Ohio Vibrant Revitalization grants. The grant funding is to help close the gap on catalytic development projects in distressed small and mid-sized communities that fulfill a market need and represent significant reinvestment in the community. For a lot of Jobs Ohio grants, there are just very specific thresholds or requirements that need to be met. The eligibility as part of the project is that it needs to be like either retail, housing, hotel, healthcare, education, or something like that. End uses that are ineligible as part of these projects include recreational facilities and parks, any streetscaping, parking lots, garages, sports venues, and anything that's just speculative. They want something to be pretty hand in and ready to go. So if you have a project that's ready to go that needs help funding, this is a good option. The Interagency Working Group is a newer collaboration effort that consists of 12 member agencies across the federal government to help support coal, oil, and gas and power plant communities transitioning away from those resources in that planning process. The working group focuses on getting the best funding options to the communities who need it. And they have significantly helped communities in their economic efforts towards revitalizing their community. They do this by targeting 4 main areas: infrastructure, environmental cleanup, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. With infrastructure, funding helps to provide reliable broadband, good roads, clean water, modern sewer systems, and affordable local transportation, while a lot of cleanup funding comes from the US EPA and other cleanup funding from DOD, and they can help support land and industrial transformation, including the development of low carbon technologies as former power plants and industrial facilities, programs to remediate abandoned mines, orphaned wells, and brownfields. Communities also deserve thriving small businesses that drive innovation, including the provision of support for them from community development financial institutions, nonprofits, and innovation hubs, as well as support for training programs to align their workforces with actual industry growth in each key region. Here's a slide that has some information on how you can get in contact with them or follow them for anything that's going on, and also sign up for updates. They have a newsletter that comes out. An example of one of these agencies that's a part of the working group is the Economic Development Administration. The EDA has a competitive grant program that focuses on impacted coal communities that can assist with economic diversification, job creation, capital investment, workforce development, and re-employment opportunities. Another funding program from the EDA are 3 other programs they have: Economic Adjustment Assistance, Planning and Local Technical Assistance Program, and Public Works. And while these are not specifically geared towards brownfield redevelopment, they very much aid in those redevelopment projects. The Appalachian Regional Commission has multiple programs and initiatives that play a pivotal role in advancing opportunities and facilitating economic growth in the Appalachian region. This region encompasses 33 counties in Ohio. There are 5 core investment areas the ARC has identified through a strategic planning process as imperative to fulfilling its mission of helping Appalachia achieve economic growth and prosperity. These 5 priorities are good to have in mind as moving forward with whether or not Appalachia or Regional Commission is a fit for your project. And they are working towards integrating brownfields into their dialogue, even though a lot of what they talk about is not brownfield specific. This is a map of Ohio's ARC counties and their economic distress designations. As indicated, one of the primary functions of ARC is making and awarding grants for projects that help stimulate the local economy. It does through several programs and initiatives which prioritize and address different areas of need, capitalize on specific regional strengths or areas of opportunity, and accordingly have unique requirements associated with each of these different grant programs. First is grantee eligibility. As you look at the list of eligible grantees or those who may apply for funding, you may notice the omission of individuals and for-profit entities. And this is because ARC does not award grants to individuals or for-profit businesses. I won't dive into detail as it's not our program, but it's important to note that ARC does derive all funding from federal government, and therefore all grants, contracts, and subawards have the same rules and requirements that govern all federal awards, which is why the applicant must be a municipality or a local government or nonprofit. ARC's focus is on economic development. They like to fund projects that have economic outcomes, jobs. They want them to be serving and improving businesses. One of the economic impact measures is acres of land prepared for development. This is a key measure they use for brownfield projects if job creations are uncertain. These counties are broken into local development districts. You guys are mostly probably familiar with these. These organizations are an excellent technical assistance resource for any of ARC's funding, especially for area development. In Ohio, grantees must apply to their LDD in order to access area development funds. So as a result, I have put that information up here for you guys to access if you are not familiar with the LDDs, and then also your state contacts for the ARC program if you ever want to reach out to them for any specific grant. So now I'm going to jump into and briefly go over federal grant funding. This is probably one of the best options for communities who are looking for cleanup funds and large amounts of assessment funds, but it is also extremely competitive. So when you're trying to decide, which grant should I go for, this is just a very short list. It might differ depending on a specific project, but one question is, how many brownfields do you have? If you just have a couple or it's a small project, maybe the Ohio EPA or KSU tab is a better option, especially for your timeline. If you have a lot, then that funding amount is going to go up and you might want to do a federal grant. Does your organization have knowledge and capacity to manage a grant? Federal grants require you to have the capacity to procure a contractor and to manage a large amount of money. And then also, what is your timeline? US EPA grants have a much larger timeline, which I'll go to in a second, as to when you're going to get that money to work on your project. As you know, the bipartisan infrastructure law had a huge impact on a lot of different programs, but specifically within brownfields investment, they've put towards 1.5 billion for 5 years since it started. And this is focused on getting funds to new and low capacity communities, which is usually a stipulation for making your grant competitive. Community involvement is vital, and they are definitely pushing their cleanup funding. This is just a short list of the amount of money that they're doing in FY25. This grant is currently open, but closes November 14th. And it comes around annually and is only usually open for 60 days. But they're giving away $217 million this year. So what are these grants that are available? One of which is a community-wide assessment grant. It's an environmental information required for the purchase and or redevelopment of a property. So this includes both phase 1 and phase 2 assessments that we talked about before. You can get site-specific remediation plans to get ready for cleanup. You can do brownfield inventories on a larger scale, plan for redevelopment of properties, and do lots of community involvement activities. So we have the community-wide assessment grant. Coalition assessment grant is they give out less of those, but it's a lot more money. It's 1.5 million. And it usually entails a larger capacity entity along with low capacity entities as part of the coalition. And then they also have state and tribal grants. I believe the Ohio EPA is applying for a $2 million state assessment grant this year, which means they will utilize that in their TVA program and have lots of funds to help towards a lot of those assessments that I talked about earlier. Cleanup grants are also pretty big, especially specifically right now because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. They have required no match, which is really hard to find a cleanup grant that requires no match. And they're giving away anywhere between 500,000 and 4 million. I have no idea what this will look like in the next award next year. You kind of find out from year to year when they put those out. The difference with the cleanup sites is that the applicant must actually own the site. There are ways around this sometimes, and you can do a property transfer if needed, if it's a private entity that the city really wants to get developed. It does require additional steps. There needs to be planning. There needs to be oversight. It's a little bit of a laborious program, and I definitely recommend talking to the city and the state when going through this process. So here's the timeline. As I mentioned, this year, the applications are due November 14th. They're then reviewed. KSU Tab is in the process of doing pre-reviews for a lot of grantees before they submit them. The grant selections are announced in the spring, usually in May, and then work plans are submitted. They're awarded, and you usually don't get your money until the following October fiscal year. So I am running a little bit out of time, so I'm just going to go over a few things. I'm not going to be able to go over as many case studies, but there are a few of the other elements that we kind of talked about. Environmental sustainability and social sustainability. And I have a few case studies that I can kind of explain to you. But once you've established your community engagement in your community with Brownfields and identified a unified community plan, you can use those other elements to help make that brownfield project last and make it successful over the time that you're going to have to work on it. Environmental impacts are really a big deal in a lot of communities. There are two general categories that you can consider implementing. You can integrate renewable energy or energy efficient approaches in your brownfield redevelopment and green infrastructure. Two of the most familiar renewable energy sources are solar and geothermal systems. Solar panels are one of the most common and largest renewable energy sources. And I don't know who coined the term, but they're usually referred to as bright fields. Geothermal systems can transition a facility away from fossil fuels. So they're really useful. Energy efficient production can be implemented during your development for and as part of a cleanup remedy. And you can use machinery with clean emission technology or energy efficient field equipment to help with that. KSU Tab Partners, one of our partners that helps us establish and facilitate a lot of our technical assistance is Rocky Mountain Institute. They help communities across the country advance transformational Brightfield projects. They educate communities and site owners. They do site assessments. They provide pre-development evaluations. And they provide other technical assistance and tools to help with reuse planning, funding, financing, and clean energy procurement to decide, hey, is my property able to have a solar field? Can I do this? Does this make sense? Et cetera, et cetera. Environmental sustainability also includes green infrastructure, and green infrastructure can provide a green aesthetic, which is calming and nice to look at, while also creating ecological and green infrastructure. This is an example of a former Cressage, I don't remember how to say that, sorry, department store building in Canton, which is an excellent example of green reuse. The department store thrived in the 30s and 40s, but became partially vacant and run down in the 80s. And with the help of a state brownfield grant, the city spent about $2 million to acquire the cleanup, and in the early 2000s. And then the city began the process of addressing a dilapidated downtown. And with planning, the city began the planning process for a green space with their 2013 downtown development plan, which was then incorporated later into their comprehensive plan that gave recommendations on how Canton could focus on its resources to move forward. And while this is only a small part of the city's journey of revitalizing its downtown, Centennial Plaza sits in the heart of the city with the Cressage building where it used to be, and has become the setting for concerts, graduation parties, Browns watch parties, to each their own, and more, helping to define a new Canton. I had a few other examples that I'm going to kind of breeze through as I'm running out of time. This is the American Industrial Arts Building, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Around 2014, an energy company acquired over $3 million in Clean Ohio Brownfield grant funds to remediate and create what is believed to be at the time the largest urban solar field in the country. And the renewable energy is now pumped into Cleveland Public Power Grid, benefiting the nearby university facilities. Whittier Peninsula is another really popular one, and a huge asset to the city of Columbus. I want to touch on the economic aspect of brownfield redevelopment. It's usually one of the most prominent considerations when taking on brownfield redevelopment. And I just want to highlight some of the US EPA's brownfields program as a whole. Through fiscal year 2022, the country on average leveraged about $19 for each EPA brownfields dollar expended, leading to a total of $36.12 billion leveraged. About 10 jobs were leveraged per $100,000 of EPA brownfields funds expended on assessment, cleanup, and revolving loan fund, leading to approximately 193,000 jobs created. In a study of only 48 brownfields, local governments generated between 29 and 97 million additional tax revenue dollars in the first year after cleanup. That's just a little bit of an example. With these numbers, we can understand that brownfield redevelopment can really cause a splash and then a ripple effect when creating economic growth beyond a project site. This is because success often breeds success, and people will look at your achievements and decide, hey, I want to be a part of that. And once your community is able to document and show success with the first redevelopment of a brownfield, you've started down a path of increasing local development capacity and the ability to focus on areas that are already within the city and not greenfields outside of the city. And I'm not saying you won't need any further assistance, but you've cultivated growth that's shifted your community's development area and focus. The American Can building in Cincinnati is an excellent example of increasing development capacity. It has stimulated the redevelopment of an adjacent former lumberyard and brownfield site that the city has been looking to redevelop for years. This beautiful building dates back to 1921 and was primarily used in the manufacturing of can-making machinery and parts until 1961. Subsequent uses of the property included mixed industrial and commercial use, including machining and sheet metal operations. All industrial and commercial activity ceased in 2006, and shortly after, a local redevelopment company purchased the property, and the developer used a combination of municipal development financing tools for the project, including Clean Ohio Brownfield grants for its remediation and over $7 million in tax credits for historical preservation. The historical building was renovated and reopened its doors in 2011, and the building was converted into mixed-use space with 110 loft apartments and 12,000 square feet of commercial space, boasting an urban living style, including green spaces, a cafe on the first floor of the building, and amenities in walking distance such as restaurants, boutiques, drugstores, and hardware stores. The development spurred an additional 56-unit senior living facility that was also constructed at the site and opened in 2017. And the building is now a historical landmark, regional destination, and an anchor for renewed development in Cincinnati's North Side neighborhood. This is another really great project I'm going to kind of pass by, but this is the Miles Supermarket in Cleveland. If you don't know about this, it was an old plaza that was developed in 1920s. The county worked with the development corporation to create an expanded supermarket with 30,000 square feet of new retail, a new parking lot, and green space. Three other businesses, oh, I'm sorry. Three other businesses are located in the plaza now, creating an estimated 60 to 80 additional jobs and increasing tax revenue for the city. This was done using Clean Ohio Brownfield funds and Ohio TDA funds. Most of you are probably familiar with the flats, which is a very long story and has utilized a significant amount of brownfield funding to help with the project. They received 2 separate Clean Ohio Brownfield grants, as well as other development financing tools, both through the state and through federal, and it required extensive planning that ties into the city's comprehensive plan. Remedial activities assisted with the installation of additional storm, sanitary, water, and electrical lines and infrastructure improvements, and included the installation of new combined sewer overflow, which also had funding due to the fact that it was a brownfield. On to the last element really quick, which is social. So when your neglected communities get revitalized and longtime residents and business owners who suffered through the bad times and stuck with your community, they should be able to share those good times. However, as these communities attract more investment, they often become more expensive, making it harder for residents and business owners to stay if it's not considered and taken into consideration by the planning process. So a few topics you can keep in mind for planning sustainably: affordable housing. We all need a place to live. So if you can offer a range of different housing types based on the community that is getting revitalized, it makes it possible for senior and current citizens to stay in their neighborhoods as they age. But you also want to think about new families that want to experience your community and what makes your community feel special and how do they want to create their life. So you'll need to work with your partners and planning to accommodate a new homeowner space to invest in while keeping your original folks in your community. It's a very difficult paradox. Taxpayer investment is also extremely important. I'd recommend engaging with your local officials to establish development policies and priorities that use tax dollars wisely to protect the public health and welfare of your current community, but also can balance the needs of developers. Having the freedom to choose how to travel can create a bridge for those who have limitations. So think about the choices you have for getting around town. In many places in this country, you must use a car because other options are just not safe or practical or even possible. You and your community should consider options for those who can't or choose not to own a car. This can be for your children and seniors who want more independence, and for people who might want to drive to work one day or bike the next day. And the final option to consider is creating a healthy community for all ages. You think about how to design with people in mind. Hi, Patrick. Pay careful attention to the experience each person will have with the street, the sidewalk, and the surrounding area. And you can create a healthier, interconnected community by integrating walking trails or simply by creating a walkable neighborhood. All of these aspects that I just discussed are things that KSU Tab can help with technical assistance and helping you plan for, doing community engagement with, and be a vital part of that planning process for a community. And with that, I will close for questions. I had some other case studies, but I don't need to go through those. Let me pull up my last screen so you have my information. Oop, sorry.
No, thank you so much, Roxanne. It is clear that there's a ton of information that you know about and that you shared with everybody today. So there are a couple questions with the minutes that we have left.
Yeah.
I will add that we will be sending out a link to everyone who registered for this webinar to a video recording and the slides associated with today's webinar afterwards. So that will also include Roxanne's information. So you're welcome to reach out to her. One question that we did have was just how a brownfield plan might differ from a comprehensive plan, or for planners on the call, what might you want to think about as you're thinking about how to incorporate brownfields into comprehensive or master planning processes that are underway?
So a lot of people create separate plans, but I don't think that they're necessary. I think that it's very easy to incorporate your brownfields into your current plan by taking these aspects into account. And so, a lot of plans kind of determine, what you want to see in your community, what direction you want to have your community go in. And so the aspects that need to be taken into account for a brownfield need to be in that plan. So where you're planning for a green space, it's going to be completely different when you're planning for redevelopment for like a downtown building that's dilapidated. So you still want to plan, what needs to be here, what you want to be here, what you're going to zone it for. But then when you are going through the process of how to redevelop that or how to get the right things in the right spaces, you need to have those tools in place. So you need to include your brownfield inventory in those plans. You need to include a funding list of like, what are my resources to attack these specific aspects of this plan? What needs to happen first? So if you're a community that owns these buildings and you're putting this in your plan, you should have assessments in place so you already know what the history of those properties are and what the potential contamination of those properties are, so that you're working towards cleaning those up before it's time to redevelop them, because those things can take time. So if you're doing a whole street plan, start working towards those properties now. You don't have to wait, because once you have a redeveloper come in, they most likely are going to want that property, especially in smaller communities, to be redevelopable. They don't want to wait 2 more years until you're done cleaning it up.
That's great. I am going to launch a poll for folks as well about future webinars as we continue with Q&A. One of the questions from early in the slideshow was, why does it include only low and moderate contamination? I'm not sure what that was referencing. Do you know what that was referencing?
I'm not sure, but it's not just low and moderate contamination. It identifies any contamination, but that's what usually initializes whether or not it's a brownfield. And the reason it says low and moderate is because if it's a high level of contamination that is harmful to like groundwater or people who are nearby, let's say like a huge oil spill or something like that, that goes to the level of federal cleanup and CERCLA that I mentioned, and that's no longer eligible because now you're going to be under federal cleanup orders, like you're forced to clean it up. With regular brownfields, there's no one forcing you to clean it up unless it's significantly impacting someone as is. As long as it's sitting there and nobody's touching it, it's not hurting anyone, you're not required to clean it up. You're not required to clean it up until you decide to do something with it that would impact somebody. So if you're wanting to put a residence on top of a landfill, we have a problem. But the landfill there by itself, there's no problem. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
That's the
Absolutely.
difference between a brownfield and a CERCLA type of property.
And maybe with our last question, small communities with a brownfield, sometimes it can be difficult to access state funds. Maybe they're not accustomed to that process. Where should somebody start?
Yes. So with either me or with Ohio EPA, both of us have free, easily accessible technical assistance, and all of our services that we offer, we utilize our own contractors, and is usually the challenge of capacity. And so that kind of helps build your capacity as you become familiar if you cannot handle that. So a lot of times when we're helping communities and they start with us, we help them start out. And it's just like with Bel Air, they didn't have a capacity for that. Nor did they have anything to go on, which is why we ended up doing a vision plan. But if it's a specific one-off project, we can get you started, and then we can help you collaborate with someone bigger if you need to do cleanup. But yeah, definitely start with KSU Tab or the Ohio EPA.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to put these slides together to share
Yes.
your expertise and resources. We greatly appreciate that. As
Thank you for
mentioned, we
having
will be
me.
sending this link and slides out to those who are
Okay.
on the call. Please continue taking that poll. We will also be having a number of upcoming events, which were mentioned previously. You can check out Ohio Planning's website and look at the Cleveland section, which will have those posted. Thank you so much, Roxanne. We really appreciated it.
Having me.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.